Most people assume that muscle wasting, also known as muscle atrophy, is something that only affects elderly individuals or people who are bedridden or chronically ill. But that assumption is incorrect. Muscle wasting is not confined to age or illness. It is a biological process that can begin silently in anyone at any age if the proper inputs for maintaining muscle mass are absent. What needs to be understood is that muscle is not just a passive tissue. It's an active endocrine organ. It releases signaling molecules called myokines that influence metabolism, brain function, and even immune health. So the maintenance of muscle isn't just about aesthetics or physical performance. It's central to long-term health and resilience. Now here's where this gets especially important. Muscle is in a constant state of turnover. Every day, the body is breaking down muscle proteins and synthesizing new ones. This is known as muscle protein turnover. If the rate of breakdown consistently exceeds the rate of synthesis, over time, you lose muscle mass. And this doesn't require a dramatic trigger. Even subtle shifts, like not eating enough quality protein, being in a calorie deficit too long, sleeping poorly, or not getting mechanical load through resistance exercise, can initiate this imbalance. You could be training hard but under-eating. You could be eating enough calories but not the right type or distribution of amino acids. You could be consuming plenty of protein, but spread too thin across meals to ever activate the pathways responsible for growth. This is how muscle loss sneaks up, especially in people who are seemingly doing everything right. There's also a neurological side to this. Neural input to muscle drives not only contraction, but also preservation. When you stop using a muscle through disuse or injury, there is a decrease in motor neuron signaling. That absence of signal reduces the synthesis of proteins in that muscle, which leads to atrophy. The takeaway? Inactivity, even for short periods, can quickly trigger the muscle wasting process. Another layer to consider is systemic inflammation. Low-grade inflammation, which is common in people with high stress, poor sleep, or excessive refined sugar intake, raises levels of cytokines like TNF-alpha and IL-6. These inflammatory molecules actively suppress muscle protein synthesis and accelerate degradation. So it's not just about what you do in the gym, it's also about what's happening systemically. Muscle loss isn't an on-off switch. It's a sliding scale, and most people don't notice the decline until it becomes functionally limiting, like when strength plateaus, recovery gets worse, or body composition shifts, even if weight stays constant. That's why early, consistent intervention is crucial. The key is understanding that muscle is biologically expensive to maintain. Your body won't hold on to it unless it's consistently reminded that it's necessary. That reminder comes from proper training, quality sleep, the right nutrient signals, and yes, critically, hitting the leucine threshold at each meal to trigger the anabolic machinery that keeps muscle tissue intact and growing. Let's talk about the molecular switch that tells your body to build muscle. That switch is a pathway called mTOR, short for mechanistic target of rapamycin. This is the master regulator of muscle protein synthesis. Think of mTOR as a kind of sensor in your muscle cells that responds to two things: mechanical tension from resistance training and specific nutrient signals. And among those nutrient signals, one stands above the rest: leucine. Leucine is one of the 9 essential amino acids, meaning your body cannot produce it internally. You have to get it from your diet. What makes leucine special isn't just that it helps build muscle, it's that it actually instructs your cells to begin the building process. It acts like a molecular trigger. When leucine enters the bloodstream and reaches muscle tissue, it binds to specific sensors that activate mTOR. That activation sets off a cascade of events inside the cell, initiating the translation of genetic instructions into new muscle protein. In practical terms, no leucine means no signal. And no signal means your body may still have amino acids available, but it won't be told to do anything with them. Muscle protein synthesis won't get switched on at the cellular level unless leucine reaches a certain threshold in the bloodstream. Research shows that you typically need around 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine in a single meal to fully activate mTOR. That's why simply consuming enough protein isn't always enough. What matters is the amino acid profile of that protein. Whey protein, for example, is high in leucine and rapidly absorbed. That's one reason it's so effective post-training. Animal proteins like eggs, beef, and chicken are also rich in leucine, allowing you to hit that activation threshold in a single serving. In contrast, most plant-based proteins contain significantly less leucine per gram. This doesn't make them ineffective, it just means they often require higher total quantities or strategic combinations to deliver the same anabolic signal. This is not abstract biochemistry. You can actually feel the difference. If you've ever noticed that a high protein meal sometimes leaves you flat in terms of recovery, strength, or growth, and other times you bounce back quickly, the difference may very well be leucine content and timing. Now, when you pair leucine intake with resistance training, the effects become synergistic. The mechanical load from lifting weights increases the sensitivity of your muscle tissue to leucine, amplifying the mTOR response. That's why post-workout nutrition is such a key window. The muscle cells are primed and ready to grow, but only if they receive the right signals. So leucine isn't just a building block, it's a trigger. Without it, your muscle cells don't get the message to grow. And over time, without that message being delivered consistently, muscle mass declines, even if you're training and eating well. That's why optimizing for leucine is a non-negotiable if your goal is to stop muscle wasting and build lean, resilient tissue. There's a concept in muscle biology that's often misunderstood or completely overlooked. And it's one of the key reasons people fail to build or even maintain muscle over time, even when they're training consistently and eating what appears to be a high-protein diet. That concept is the leucine threshold. Leucine isn't just one of the amino acids used to build muscle, it's a signal. It tells your cells to activate the machinery responsible for muscle protein synthesis, specifically through the mTOR pathway. But like any signal, it only works when it reaches a certain level of intensity. This is what we refer to as a threshold, the minimum effective dose required to trigger a response. For leucine, that threshold is approximately 2.5 to 3 grams per meal for most adults. Below that, the mTOR switch is only partially activated or not at all. Above that, the system flips fully into an anabolic, muscle-building state. Now, here's the problem. Many people are eating meals that contain 20 or even 30 grams of protein, but still fall short of that leucine threshold. That's because not all proteins are equal in their leucine content. For example, 25 grams of whey protein isolate can provide around 2.7 grams of leucine, enough to activate muscle protein synthesis effectively. But 25 grams of protein from brown rice or lentils might only yield about 1.5 grams of leucine. Not enough to hit the activation point. So if you're not deliberately structuring meals to meet the leucine threshold, you could be leaving significant anabolic potential untapped. This is especially important for anyone over the age of 30, when muscle protein synthesis naturally becomes less efficient, a phenomenon called anabolic resistance. Hitting that threshold becomes even more essential as you age. What's powerful about this mechanism is that it gives you a clear target. Rather than guessing how much protein you need, you can aim specifically for meals that deliver at least 2.5 grams of leucine, ideally spaced across the day in 3 to 4 high-quality feedings. This distributes anabolic signaling evenly and ensures that your body stays in a net muscle-building state more often. Practically speaking, this means meals should include leucine-rich sources like eggs, meat, fish, dairy, or whey protein. For those on a plant-based diet, combining proteins like pea and rice or adding free-form leucine as a supplement can help bridge the gap. And remember, this threshold applies per meal, not per day, spreading out your protein intake evenly across breakfast, lunch, and dinner, each with enough leucine to cross that 2.5 to 3 gram threshold is far more effective than loading all your protein into one massive dinner. Your body responds best to repeated high-quality signals, not infrequent massive doses. This is the difference between simply eating protein and using it strategically. Once you understand and apply the leucine threshold, your nutrition becomes a precision tool, not just fuel, but a message to your muscle cells that it's time to grow. A common misconception is that simply eating a high-protein diet guarantees muscle growth or maintenance. But the reality is far more nuanced. Many people who are consuming what looks like enough protein, sometimes even well over the recommended daily intake, are still not optimizing for muscle protein synthesis. Why? Because they're missing a critical piece of the equation, the leucine threshold. Let's break this down. When we talk about protein, we're really talking about a blend of amino acids. But not all amino acids have the same role. Some are structural, some support neurotransmitter production, and some, like leucine, act as signals. Leucine is the key amino acid that activates mTOR, the central switch for muscle protein synthesis. Without enough leucine in the bloodstream, that switch doesn't flip. It doesn't matter if you consumed 40 grams of protein. If the leucine content of that protein is too low, you won't get a meaningful anabolic response. And this is where most high-protein diets fall short. People focus on total grams of protein without considering the amino acid profile. For example, if someone's daily intake includes 100 grams of protein, but it's coming from low leucine sources like grains, beans, or certain plant-based shakes, they may only be hitting 1 to 1.5 grams of leucine per meal. That's below the 2.5 to 3 gram threshold needed to fully activate muscle protein synthesis. To be clear, this doesn't mean plant proteins are useless, not at all, but they require either larger quantities or smarter combinations to reach the same leucine levels found in smaller portions of animal protein or whey isolate. So the issue isn't just protein intake, it's leucine availability per meal. That's the signal your muscles are actually listening for. Another layer here is protein distribution. Many people consume the bulk of their daily protein at dinner, leaving breakfast and lunch relatively low in both total protein and leucine. That means for 2/3 of the day, the body isn't getting enough of a signal to build or preserve muscle. You may be in the gym working hard, but if your meals aren't crossing that leucine threshold consistently, you're likely training in an environment where the body is under-recovering and muscle is slowly being lost over time. This explains why some people, despite eating well and lifting regularly, plateau or even regress in strength and lean mass. They're not under-eating, they're under-signaling. The body needs a clear, repeated message. Grow, repair, maintain. Leucine is that message. So if you're serious about preserving or building muscle, it's not just about hitting a protein number, it's about designing your meals to hit that leucine threshold each time you eat. That's how you shift from a diet that supports muscle to a diet that stimulates it. Once you understand this distinction, you can structure your intake with far greater precision. And finally, unlock the results your training and recovery deserve. Once you understand the importance of leucine as the key activator of muscle protein synthesis, the next step is knowing where to find it. And not all protein sources are created equal in that regard. Animal proteins, like beef, chicken, eggs, fish, and dairy, are naturally rich in leucine. They contain the full spectrum of essential amino acids in the right ratios for human physiology, which is why they're referred to as complete proteins. More importantly, they deliver enough leucine per serving to often meet or exceed the 2.5 to 3 gram threshold required to stimulate the mTOR pathway and trigger muscle growth. For example, just 3 whole eggs provide around 1.2 grams of leucine, and 25 grams of whey protein isolate delivers roughly 2.7 grams, enough to flip the anabolic switch with a single serving. Whey isolate in particular is an extremely effective tool for this purpose. It's rapidly absorbed, has a high biological value, and is naturally high in leucine. Post-exercise, when muscle cells are more sensitive to nutrient signals, a scoop of whey isolate can provide a quick, efficient surge of leucine to fully activate muscle protein synthesis during the recovery window. Now, when we shift to plant-based diets, the situation changes. Most plant proteins are incomplete or have suboptimal ratios of essential amino acids. And across the board, they tend to be significantly lower in leucine. For instance, a serving of brown rice protein might only offer about 1.5 grams of leucine per 25 grams of protein. And pea protein is slightly better, but still falls short of what you'd find in animal-based sources. This doesn't mean that plant-based diets can't support muscle growth. They absolutely can, but it requires more strategy. You either need to increase total protein intake, sometimes by 30% or more, to make up for the lower leucine density, or you need to combine complementary plant proteins that together deliver a more complete amino acid profile. For example, pairing rice and pea protein works well, or adding legumes to grains in a meal can enhance both the leucine content and the overall bioavailability. Another viable strategy is supplementing with free-form leucine. This allows plant-based eaters to add an extra gram or 2 of leucine to a meal that would otherwise fall short of the threshold. It's simple, effective, and gives you the same mTOR activation as a high leucine, animal-based meal, assuming the rest of the diet is sound. What's crucial here is precision. It's not enough to hit a general protein target. You need to know how much leucine you're actually consuming per meal and from which sources. Because your body doesn't care whether your protein came from a steak, a shake, or lentils. It only cares whether that leucine signal crossed the threshold. That's the language your muscle tissue understands. When you get that right, the whole system works. Miss it, and the opportunity for growth passes quietly by. One of the most critical, yet often underutilized tools in muscle preservation and growth is timing. Specifically, the timing of leucine intake in relation to resistance training. Understanding when to deliver that leucine signal can dramatically amplify the effects of your workouts. Here's what the science shows. After resistance training, muscle tissue becomes more sensitive to amino acids, particularly leucine. This period, often referred to as the anabolic window, lasts for about 3 to 5 hours post-exercise, with the first 60 to 90 minutes being the most responsive. During this window, your muscle cells are primed, they've undergone mechanical tension, micro trauma, and metabolic stress, all of which increase the expression of receptors and signaling molecules related to muscle repair and growth. But those signals need a partner. Training creates the potential for adaptation, but it's the delivery of leucine that turns that potential into a biological response. If training is the key that unlocks the door, leucine is the one that pushes it open. When you consume a leucine-rich meal or supplement in that post-workout period, ideally with 2 to 3 grams of leucine, you amplify the mTOR signaling pathway at a time when the system is most receptive. That synergy results in a greater rate of muscle protein synthesis than you'd get from either training or leucine alone. In fact, studies have shown that when leucine is delivered shortly after training, the muscle building response is significantly greater compared to delayed intake, even if the total daily protein remains the same. Whey protein isolate is particularly useful here. It's rapidly digested, contains high levels of leucine, and causes a sharp rise in blood leucine concentrations, precisely what you want after training. Consuming 20 to 30 grams of whey within an hour post-workout typically provides the full 2.7 to 3 grams of leucine needed to flip the switch on mTOR and begin the repair process immediately. This isn't just about building new tissue. It's about recovery speed, performance consistency, and muscle retention over time. The sooner you trigger the anabolic response after training, the more effectively you repair damaged fibers and lay down new, stronger ones. Delaying this signal, on the other hand, means you miss the peak window of cellular responsiveness, and while you may still recover, you won't recover as efficiently or completely. For plant-based athletes, this timing principle is just as critical, but since many plant proteins are slower to digest and lower in leucine, it becomes even more important to either consume a larger quantity, combine multiple sources, or supplement with free-form leucine to reach that 2.5 to 3 gram threshold within the same post-training window. The key point is this: the body is most responsive to nutritional signals when they arrive in synchrony with physiological demand. Training opens that window. Leucine drives the message through it. When timed correctly, this pairing doesn't just maintain muscle. It sends a clear, repeated instruction to grow. And that instruction becomes the foundation of long-term strength, performance, and resilience. It's easy to think of muscle growth as purely a function of training and nutrition. Lift weights, hit your protein target, get your leucine. Results should follow. But biology doesn't operate in isolation. Leucine may be the key signal for muscle protein synthesis, but the system it's acting on is embedded in a much larger network, one shaped by your entire lifestyle. To be clear, leucine activates the mTOR pathway. It initiates the muscle building process, but whether or not your body follows through on that signal, how strongly it responds, how efficiently it recovers, how effectively it builds new tissue, that depends on internal conditions, and those conditions are influenced by 3 major factors: sleep, stress, and systemic recovery. Let's start with sleep. Deep sleep, especially in slow wave and REM stages, is when growth hormone pulses, tissue repair accelerates, and anabolic signaling consolidates. If you're getting inconsistent or shallow sleep, your ability to synthesize new muscle proteins drops, even if you're hitting your leucine threshold. In fact, studies show that sleep deprivation not only impairs mTOR activity, but increases cortisol levels, which directly oppose anabolic signaling. In other words, if your sleep is broken, you're sending conflicting messages to your body. Grow and break down at the same time. Now consider stress. Chronic psychological or physiological stress elevates cortisol and adrenaline, both of which shift your body into a catabolic state. That means increased protein breakdown, reduced mTOR signaling, and impaired nutrient absorption. The worst part, these effects can happen even when your training and nutrition are on point. You may be consuming the right amount of leucine, but under high stress, your cells become less responsive to it. They interpret the overall hormonal environment as one of threat and breakdown, not repair and growth. Then there's recovery, both systemic and local. Recovery isn't just about resting the muscle you trained, it's about restoring nervous system balance, reducing inflammation, and allowing the entire physiological system to reset. Overtraining, poor hydration, nutrient deficiencies, and even social jet lag, irregular sleep-wake patterns can blunt your ability to respond to anabolic signals like leucine. If the system is still in a state of repair or inflammation from previous stressors, it deprioritizes new muscle synthesis in favor of survival and stability. So leucine doesn't work in a vacuum. It's a trigger, yes, but the receptiveness of your body to that trigger depends on the internal terrain you've created. Think of it this way. Leucine is the instruction to grow, but your sleep, stress levels, and recovery state determine whether that instruction gets read or ignored. The solution isn't complex, but does require consistency. Prioritize high-quality sleep, 7 to 9 hours in a cool, dark room. Mitigate stress through breath work, mindfulness, or simple exposure to natural light in the morning, and build recovery days into your training week to allow the system to fully respond to the leucine signal. Because in the end, it's not just about sending the right message, it's about creating the right environment for that message to be heard. So the message is clear. Muscle isn't just built in the gym or by eating more protein. It's maintained and grown through targeted, intelligent signaling, and leucine is at the center of that process. But it's not about more. It's about precision. Hitting that 2.5 to 3 gram leucine threshold per meal isn't optional. It's essential. It's the difference between just eating protein and actually using it to drive an anabolic response. Whether your protein comes from animal sources, whey isolate, or carefully structured plant-based combinations, what matters is that you hit the signal strong enough and often enough to activate muscle protein synthesis. Then you align that signal with training, optimize timing, especially post-exercise, and support it with quality sleep, low stress, and adequate recovery. Because in the end, muscle is not just about aesthetics or strength. It's about resilience, longevity, and health span. Preventing muscle wasting isn't just a goal for athletes or the aging. It's a biological imperative for everyone who wants to remain functional, energetic, and independent as they move through life. So make the shift. Stop muscle wasting now, not by guessing, but by mastering the signal. Leucine is the lever. You just have to know how to pull it.